So how do you perfectly balance a level 20 campaign-ending final combat against the Lich and Draco Lich, both with 1,000 health, clone doppelgangers of each player, double layer actions, time dilation, and alternate objectives? The answer is you don't. If that sounds crazy, I'm sure you'll leave a comment down below, but buckle up for this rant and you might just see what I'm talking about. But first, the sponsor of today's video is my Patreon. But really, the support I get over on Patreon is why I'm able to do all the things I'm able to do and create all these next level resources. I make monthly D&D magazines called DC Playbooks that give unique homebrew rules and systems that you won't find anywhere else. On top of all that, I usually have monsters, subclasses, items, and over 30 pages of professional grade content that I make each and every month, full of custom art too. You can become a patron by clicking the link down in the description and immediately get access to the current month's playbook, and each and every month after that, you get more and more resources to level up your D&D game. I'm saying that you should not try so hard to perfectly balance your combat encounters. Now, it might be a bold statement, but here's why. I have a whole video series I've been doing recently talking about ways to speed up combat, and you could say that this video fits into that category. The first big reason is perfectly balanced combat takes way longer. And as the dungeon coach, I'm going to use a sports analogy here of basketball. If you have two very evenly paced teams, perfectly matched, it's going to go into overtimes or possibly multiple overtimes, really dragging out. Dragging out? Drag. Sorry. But this really does make sense, and it also applies directly to Dungeons and Dragons. If things are dead even, it's going to be a really close back and forth. But this really makes sense in real life and Dungeons and Dragons, because if your players are way more powerful than whatever you throw at them, they're going to completely stomp it and wipe the floor with it. But if you turn the tables on that and they're far weaker, they are also going to get stomped on themselves. So they have to run and come up with other things, and that combat is going to be very quick. Either they get stomped or they stomp them. And another quick tip for those extreme scenarios is I do like to throw those extreme scenarios at my players, because if you throw combat at them that they are way more powerful than, I didn't do this enough. This is one of my early DM tips that I stopped doing this. I want to give my players things that they could absolutely destroy, makes them feel good, makes them feel powerful. I forgot to do that early on in my DMing. I just would always give them fights that were pretty solid or below, or that it would be pretty close, whether it be higher or lower. But sometimes you got to throw some stuff at them that they can just completely stomp, go crazy with, and have some fun. And at the same time, you also have to throw stuff at your player, no matter what level they are, early on, mid campaign, whatever. Throw stuff at them that's extremely challenging to the point where they might not be able to do it. But if you do this, make sure you give them some sort of warning signs, or you really make sure you explain through NPCs or otherwise that this thing is extremely dangerous that they're about to go towards, so they are aware that they're going into something that's this high of danger. But even in those situations, they're having to think outside the box instead of just fight the thing till they kill it. They got to figure out how to use their abilities in different ways to run away from the thing. Incapacitate it, slow it down, get reinforcements, whatever. But if you bring that all the way to a perfectly balanced, literally perfectly balanced, that fight is going to take a long time. And that perfectly balanced fight probably won't have as many of those swings of huge successes or really scary failures. And if we go back to the extremes, but a little bit less extreme, and throw a fight at them that's actually doable, that's going to feel a lot more rewarding and more dynamic if they actually can accomplish that and really think creatively to be able to overcome. It's going to be a lot more rewarding and challenge them. And on the other side of things, if you throw something at them that's just like, oh, this is super easy, and they're real relaxed with it and they're not taking it as seriously, because they probably shouldn't. They could actually get surprised and something happened that they weren't expecting, and now they actually have to kind of scramble a little bit and take these things a little more serious. Another reason is all the time that you would have to spend to actually balance and find how strong your players are, do all these things, how strong the enemies are, do all those things, maybe do some grindy calculations with math and stuff. All of that time spent, you can spend it better building better experiences, maps, terrain, minis, mechanics, plot devices, tie-ins, different triggers. Elevate the actual game that they're going to be playing and add cool stuff that's going to make them think and challenge them. This just made me think of a question I had asked during one of my live streams about alternate objectives and how do you balance an encounter when you have an alternate objective in there. And again, you don't. Throw the alternate objective in there. Don't be restricted or worry about the math and the calculations and the balance, because you want to throw something cool in there and add some sort of alternate objective. I have a whole video coming out on that soon. I'll try and release it around this time. The link will be in the description. But throw in stuff. Don't be hesitant. Oh no, I might break. Like, do the cool stuff. Throw cool stuff at them and see what happens. Timeout. I don't want to contradict what I just said, because you should not be reckless as a dungeon master and just throw stuff at them all willy-nilly. It is a skill to be able to understand what thought that you have that you want to put in there and what the outcome will be. But through homebrewing and through trying these things out, First, starting at small scale and just add extra little stuff in there. Add extra mechanics to the monsters. I had a whole video I just did about homebrewing your monsters and add cool mechanics, and don't be afraid of doing that. The more you do these things and push the limits of this, the more experience you'll have and more comfortable you'll feel at doing it yourself. Responsibly. Okay. Another big point here that I kind of referenced earlier is your players will always surprise you. There's so many times, far more than I can count, where I'm like, all right, this fight is going to screw them up. This might be a TPK. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I really want to set the stage and really elevate it to make sure they know how dangerous this thing is. And then they keep going, they come up with things that I never thought of, combine things I never thought of in a way that work together in ways I never would have thought of. They are outnumbering you. Your players will always outnumber you, and they will outthink you, and they will surprise you. And those are some of my most proud moments as a dungeon master. Those will happen. So if you spend a time perfectly balancing a fight, you're actually wrong. So even if you get it right and you perfectly balance an encounter, you're wrong. They're going to outdo you, and it's not going to be perfectly balanced because your players will always surprise you. So always throw in the stuff that you feel like would be there. And what I mean by that is whatever things you think that this monster should have, let it have that ability. That's going to probably make it more stronger, but that's fine because your players will be able to deal with it. If there's a huge army that's supposed to be there and there's more enemies that should be there, put them there. Don't be afraid about, oh no, I don't want to throw 5 enemies there. Might be too. If there should be 5 enemies there because it's an encampment of some kind, put them there. But again, if you get to the point where what would be there would be so much, make sure the players are aware and you give them some sort of clues that they should be able to find out along the way so they don't just run into a TPK out of nowhere. So my big personal example on this here is the final combat of my 3-year-long completely homebrew campaign. The final boss was a lich with 1,000 health and a possible second form that had another 1,000 health, whose mount that he rode was a Draco Lich with another 1,000 health, that if it died, it would merge with him to give him more health. And if all of that health sounds crazy, trust me, these were not just sacks of health. They all had a ton of homebrew abilities, different homebrew spells, breath weapons, merging effects, auras, passives, all these different things, layer actions. Each one of those 2 creatures had their own set of legendary actions that they could both use independently. And as the dungeon master of these players for the course of a 3-year-long campaign, I knew what their damage output was, and they were actually loaded up with a bunch of different stuff that they could do. Because I remember back around level 15 or so, whenever I threw a 1,000 health monster at them, and I was like, is this too much? But keep in mind when I say all these numbers, this was from my own group with what I wanted to give them. Did I know that 2,000 health collectively with a possible 3,000 or even more if everything merged together, not meant to mention everything else that was going on? Was that enough? Was that too much? It's what felt right, and I edged on the side of too much because this is the final campaign ending fight. You know what I'm saying? You cannot perfectly balance this thing. You got to go for it. So on top of these 2 legendary creatures, there were 2 layer actions, one on initiative 20 and one on initiative 10. I do that sometimes. It's another cool little homebrew thing I do. The first one was darkness. There was this overwhelming darkness in 2 different spots of the room that were starting to grow and take over the room. The Lich also had an ability that they could put another pocket of it to where certain parts of the room were growing with this absolute darkness. And all of the abilities were way worse if you were inside of that darkness. But the Druid and the Paladin have some light abilities that they picked up throughout the journey leading up to this big final boss to be able to combat that in some way. But wait, hold up. How do you balance that? How do you know how strong that darkness is? How do you know how much squares it should go out per round? What's balanced? Nope, just make cool mechanics and then let them figure it out from there. The second layer action was a skeleton army that would raise up from the ground. Different little pockets of skeletons all over the ground would start raising up on that initiative count. And there were going to be 4 time wraiths, a homebrew type of wraith, but they were able to hack down 3 of them leading up to this big fight in very creative ways that they were able to do. But there was one of those flying around kind of manipulating time in some ways and slowing people down. And there was 4 clones, which actually turned into 3 clones because the fight right before this, they were able to take one of them out, thinking outside the box and stuff, and they had to fight 3 different clones of themselves that had mirrored abilities. So we're talking about perfectly balancing things, right? I cloned 3 of my players and made a version of them that had linked abilities. So if the Paladin did Divine Smite, the Doppelganger thing activated its Divine Smite. That alone could be a pretty interesting fight of your players fighting Doppelganger versions of themselves, much less in the big picture of everything I'm saying. And while all of this is going on, there's a huge time dilation dome with an extremely important plot point of the Lich's daughter held in stasis in the center, where the Chronomancy wizard had to deal with this throughout the entire fight. Every turn having to think of his action economy being towards the group and helping all the stuff I just described, or going towards the dome. So I asked you, my friends, how would you balance this? But I'm here to tell you, don't worry, it's super easy. You don't. I am a math teacher by trade, and I have no idea how I would weight each of those variables, combine them together, and give some sort of experience threshold power level that's supposed to be compared to my players, who each would have their own power level combined together. But that entire fight and story is one for another video, so leave a comment down below if you want to give the full breakdown of what happened, because it was one of the craziest endings ever. But back to what we're talking about. So in the big picture, what I'm saying here, when you're thinking about balancing your encounters, first of all, don't try to balance them. Try to put them at the spot where you want it to feel, and challenge them or not, depending on whatever you're wanting to throw at them. But keep your world alive and accountable for whatever should be there. If there should be a huge army of forces that they knew they were going into, and they're following after a huge horde of bandits, and there should be 20 of them, then there should be 20 of them, and they should know that. And if they get into trouble, then they should get captured and imprisoned or something. And you don't have to always TPK them if they get in over their heads. There's lots of things you can do instead of TPKing your party. Let me know if you want to see a video on that too. But in the same way, your players will overcome these crazy things and lead to epic moments for them. And they will also respect your world, because what you put in there is what should be there, and they were able to understand that, know what they were getting themselves into, and succeed or fail. If you want to see more of my thoughts on how I balance encounters, specifically I have a whole video where I talk about more of my thoughts and behind the scenes of it instead of just the overall concept. Do you want more of these rants? Do you want more stories about my previous campaigns? Or do you want access to all of my homebrew rules in one easy location? See the segue there? I'm about to release my Kickstarter on July 1st, and the link for that will be down in the description. You can click it to get alerted whenever it goes live. Lots of stuff will be coming out, and in the future it'll actually be a link to the actual book itself, which sounds crazy to think of that I'm gonna have that. It is basically my personal version of D&D. You could call it D&D 5.5, dare I say, but it's combat, social encounters, exploration, all different homebrew tips and rules and different rule variants to be able to pick and choose from to customize to your table. But you'll always be able to find out all the stuff down in the description. What's also down in that description for a limited time is the link to the giveaway. I'm doing a $500 giveaway leading up to the Kickstarter. There's lots of different ways to join. I only talk about this at the end of the videos to thank you for staying to the end of the videos. I really do appreciate it. You can sign up on my email list. I'm going to pick somebody from my email list that's on my website that I just launched the website too. And the link to the Kickstarter is on there as well. I'm going to pick somebody from Discord. I'm going to pick somebody from my Patreon, and I'm going to pick somebody from the giveaway link. And another one I'm doing on my live streams that I do on Wednesdays. But I hope that all of this and this rant and everything has inspired you to not stress out so much when you're trying to think of cool stuff, and just throw the cool stuff at them. And over time, you'll get better and better at challenging your players and coming up with these cool homebrew ideas or different little tweaks to spice up whatever you want to throw at them. Don't be afraid. Think outside the box. And until next time, stay creative and think outside the box. Peace.